Today on episode number 519 of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, How to Foster Self-Compassion as a Professor with Danielle De La Mare.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'm Bonnie Stahoviak, and this is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to improve our productivity approaches so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. Once a tenured professor stuck in the academic overwork burnout cycle, Dr. Danielle De La Mare found herself confused, scared, and hopeless about the future of her career. Her imposter feelings, including shame and fear, drove her to intense levels of overwork, often debilitating anxiety and exhaustion. She often hustled to prove her worth, and much of the hustle was around her teaching, which eventually led to burnout. Today, as a career wellness coach, Danielle facilitates deep study for academics who are stuck in their own academic overwork burnout cycle. She's also the creator of the Self-Compassionate Professor podcast, featuring guests who have paved creative and self-compassionate career paths after struggle. Danielle De La Mare, welcome to Teaching in Higher Ed.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bonnie. It's so nice to be here.
I get so many random messages associated with being somebody who's podcasted for a long time. And I will tell you, when the message from you came in, it was like, oh, let's stop everything. This is a very, very important message. And I'm so grateful for your work and even just the short time I've known about you and what you do. And so I want to say again, I guess, so glad you're here. So glad that your work exists in this, and so many of us need this so much.
That's so nice to hear. Thank you for saying that. I know, whenever I say it, thank you for saying that, often people are like, well, I'm not just saying that. And I just want you to know that I don't hear that you're just saying that. I appreciate you letting me know. That feels good. I have this sense that I have, my perspective is that we all have a purpose, that we all have sort of something that we're supposed to do in the world, and our strengths and our limitations and the things that we offer are here for a reason. And so you saying that just, I don't know, it offers me confirmation that I'm on the track I want to be on.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I suspect that I'm not alone in the part of the bio that I just read from you, this idea of the hustle, especially the hustle as it relates to feeling a sense that we need to prove our worth by working harder and harder. And rather than me talk about what that looks like in my life, I'm far more interested in what that looks like for you, or what you've seen it look like in other people.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So I first heard it in that context from Brene Brown, the hustling for your worth. Mm-hmm. And when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like the story of my life, hustling for my worth. I started out as a first gen college student. And so I never felt like I belonged. I never felt like I knew what I was doing. And actually, the older I get, the more I realize nobody knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But
yes.
What I noticed was that I had gotten caught up in this overwork cycle. And I have an example of spending an entire 8-hour day just on one class period, planning for one class period, an entire 8 hours. And I did it because I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted them to connect to it. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to walk out of my classroom that day totally transformed. And I had all of these perfectionistic ideas that took me to places that weren't healthy. And I worked way, 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 way harder than I should have, because I thought that if I didn't work hard, people would see that I wasn't worthy of being their teacher. And I also felt it a little bit with colleagues as well. If I don't work hard enough, they'll see that I really shouldn't be in this department. I really shouldn't be a colleague. So yeah, that's the hustle, I guess, is in that way, sort of hustling to, it's almost like I'm lying to people and I'm trying to show them, like the used car salesman, kind of like I'm trying to show them that I actually have what I don't actually have. So it shows up in that way. But secondly, the hustle shows up in just hustle culture in terms of just we are always working. We are always busy. We are always doing, going. And so hustling in both ways has been a huge, huge part of my sort of healing in my life.
As you were sharing those stories, and thank you so much for that. I suspect there will be people listening who can really relate to an 8-hour day on a single. That's because I think about the questions that I've gotten over all these years, and it's, how do we know when it's enough? And I think sometimes we can get our minds wrapped around that we're supposed to then, if this is resonating for anyone listening, and I suspect for many listening it will. I find that sometimes it's, then I just need to be more like this other person who has a totally different personality than me. I'm not a mellow person, but I'm also so I want to remind myself, it's okay to find joy in your work. It's okay to work in differing rhythms that other people don't work in. You are not an 8 to 5 person, and to try to make yourself into a mold that has predictable, relaxed, mellowed hours would be to lose some huge parts of who I am and what brings me joy. And I have to share, this is going to be family friendly, the way that I describe this, but it wasn't family friendly when I read it. There was some meme out there that said something about, and I'm not going to get it right. If I can find it, I will put a link in the show notes, but it was something like, I'm just trying to find, I have sometimes I give too many Fs, and sometimes I don't give enough Fs, and I'm just trying to find the proper F distribution. But it was a curse word in place of the letter F there. And I spell that, by the way, EFFS. Yes, that's the proper spelling for that. And that, ever since I saw it was probably 6 months ago, it keeps resonating, because it's like, the too many, spending 8 hours to plan for one class session, that's probably too many Fs. But to me, the opposite is not going to heal me, right? So I guess one thing we could start with is just how important in your work have you found it for yourself and for those that you work with, that we're able to name some of these emotions that you talked about, with terms of this hustle, that needing to have the sense of worth from that, the fear, the shame, the attachment to what's going to happen to us. How important is the naming process and all of that?
That's a good question. I used to, when I taught college students, I would every day ask them to name how they were feeling when I took roll. So I would ask them to give me an emotion word. And I got that from a colleague who did something like that, but I modified it and made it about emotion specifically. And I found that when they named their emotions and when I named mine, because I would always do it too, it brought me down a notch. I felt less anxious. I felt more connected to myself. I felt more connected to them. There's something about naming what's happening to you that allows you to, it's like it takes off the foggy glasses almost, and you can actually see a little bit more clearly what your experience actually is. And that then allows you to connect more deeply to your own inner wisdom. And it allows you to connect more deeply to the people around you. But I think there's also moments when you don't need to name it. You just need to feel it. You might be feeling an emotion, and you don't need to go to your head to figure out what the name of that emotion is. You can just feel it. I have a morning practice where I just sit there and I feel the emotions that I'm having, right? I am a human being in this human body, and I have these emotions, and I like to just sit there and be in the emotions and feel them fully, because it allows me to release them. And sometimes I name them and sometimes I don't. So I think it's really important to name them. And there are times when you don't necessarily need to name them. You just need to feel them.
More of what I'm hearing with what you just shared is really the importance of that pause. In fact,
Mm.
before we started recording, you started to pause yourself, and I thought, well, I'm going to join her in this pause. And how much can happen when we do take those pauses. I have a similar practice in my teaching where every time we get together, it'll be, what's one thing since we last gathered together that has brought you life, brought you joy? And what's one thing that has taken life away, taken the joy away? And I will occasionally forget to do it. And you'll miss things like someone's getting married, or someone just had a baby, or it's someone's birthday, or even, I mean, to find out a loss of a family member, all the things. And if I don't slow myself down, then I'll miss really vital information to know, both for that moment of attempting to foster community, but also that story that gets told as we join others in community for any length of time. I do this, by the way, with meetings at work too. It's a really cool, by the way, I did not invent this. It is a variation of an ancient Ignatian prayer, that those two questions of what brought you life and what took life away.
Well, what I like about it when I hear it is just this, it's this sense that you belong here. And I think that when you're unable, when you're bringing whatever it is you're bringing to the classroom and it doesn't get acknowledged and nobody knows about it, you feel like you're shrinking. You don't feel like you're part of the group. You don't feel seen. I think that's what I love about that. That's a great practice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Talk about a time of, either for you or someone that you've worked alongside, where what does it look like when we lack self-compassion? What's a snapshot of what that might look like?
Oh, well, for me, it was pushing myself to be something I wasn't. And that that could show up in the classroom as like this. I always have these moments where I need to slow down and I need to pause, as we were talking about, and I wouldn't let myself. For example, like, I need to sit here and digest what I just said, and I need you to all sit here and digest what I just said. And we need to sort of like leave this moment that we just had and transition into a new moment. And we need a little bit of space to do that. And I think that not having those moments, not giving myself those moments, not letting myself have those moments, was lack of self-compassion. Lack of self-compassion showed up as like, I don't have time to take care of myself. I don't have time to eat healthy. I don't have time to connect with my best friend. I don't have, it's this like, you don't matter. That it was lack of self-compassion. You don't matter. What you do need to do, though, is show up for the world around you, for all the expectations, for all the to-dos. You need to, I guess we come back to hustle again. You need to hustle to show everyone else that you belong. And meanwhile, you're not even belonging to yourself, right? You just belong to them, not you. And it hurts and it's painful. And you eventually, at least that's what happened to me, burn out.
Yeah, and there's so much, thank you for sharing that. There's so much in that around ableism. There's so much around that of expecting people to not have bodies. I'm thinking, as you were sharing, a former colleague who sadly passed away, that would be sipping the ginger ale between classes as she was going through chemo. And I mean, we're not supposed to vomit when we're on chemo or when we're pregnant or for whatever's going on in our bodies. Yeah. And there's so much that gets ingrained in that. And you said the word belonging earlier, the belonging and the mattering. You belong, but you also matter. You matter, and you matter not just your brain, but you matter, your body matters, and your body is going to have needs that if we don't, leave room for our own bodily needs, how could we possibly ever expect that someone else might be able to have room for their own bodily needs? Yeah.
And I would also go beyond the body piece too and say, lack of self-compassion is also about like not paying attention to what your bigger sort of desires are in your life, right? I remember being at a faculty meeting once, and I had a colleague who, she and I were like really close, and we talked a lot about how much our sort of personal desires and identities shaped who we were as teachers. And we wanted the whole group of faculty in our department to sort of think about that question. And so our chair gave us a few minutes, and he didn't love it, but he gave us a few minutes to talk and sort of talk about this idea, and then have each person say what it is they actually really would love to have happen in their lives, beyond all the regular stuff that you talk about in a faculty meeting. We wanted something sort of deeper. And one of our colleagues said something like, I want to write a children's book. And we were like, what? We had no idea. This was a quantitative researcher. She's not the kind of person you would have thought would have wanted to do that. And that's what she wanted. But she pushed it down because she was like, I don't have time for that. Maybe when I get to full professor, I'll do that. And so lack of self-compassion, I believe, is pushing those like deeper desires down and not letting them out, and not giving yourself space to process how they might happen in your life, how you might, bring them into fruition. Yeah. So there's like a sort of a psychological, spiritual element to it, but there's also sort of a body element to it. I guess mind, body, spirit. There's the self-compassionate way, and there's the non-self-compassionate way. In one way you exist, and the other way you don't, basically.
You've started to touch on this a bit, but tell us a little bit more. Why do we need self-compassion?
Well, I want to first say that we all deserve to take up space in the world. It is our right. It is our birthright. And if we don't take up space in the world, and self-compassion allows us to take up space in the world, right? When we actually open up space for ourselves, we open up space for our own gifts to change other people, to impact the world in positive ways. But if we don't let ourselves do that, if we don't let ourselves exist, right? If we don't let ourselves be who we are, the world suffers a little bit because our gifts are not there, right? They're missing.
And tell us a bit, what are some ways we can have more self-compassion?
One of the first things that comes up for me is I just had a client that I was talking to this morning, and she's talking about something that's really difficult that she's been going through. And she talked about it for a good, 15 minutes or so. And at the end of that, I said, let's just take a second and really feel all the pain that you've been feeling. And put your hands over your heart. Like, I'm a huge fan of Kristen Neff. So if you're into self-compassion, Kristen Neff is the person to go to, her research. And so I was doing the Kristen Neff stuff, right? Put your hands over your heart. Let's really let yourself surrender all of these feelings into your own hands, right? And almost like your hands are holding you up. And you get to just fully surrender. Your hands get to be your refuge. And then language, right? What is some language? Like, this is so freaking hard. Of course I'm feeling this way. Of course it's been a hard few days, or it's been a hard couple of weeks. Of course, right? Like, giving ourselves some language that allows us also to surrender. That's a good way to just acknowledge and honor your own humanity. And it's also super, super, super useful for shame. So I used to get really for lack of a better word, shamey. I would feel shame when I would walk out of the classroom and it didn't go well. And it would be really intense shame, really, really, really intense to the point that it would be almost debilitating. And I would try to shove it away. And I remember coming home one day and having a drink, like pouring vodka and cranberry juice and just like trying to get rid of it. If you're feeling shame, that process of just sort of turning into the feelings, holding yourself, giving yourself words that you can surrender into, that entire process is going to be so much more effective than having the drink or trying to, binge watch something and try to get rid of it, because shame is this really powerful, terrible, terrible feeling emotion that hangs over you. And until you fully feel it, you are not going to be able to release it fully. It's going to keep coming back. It's always going to be in the background and it's always going to feel kind of gross. So that process, if you're dealing with shame, is a really, 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 really effective process.
My sense is, as you're describing this, it's really resonating with me, just the importance of that. I mean, I haven't done the lay my heart on my hands, but I'm going to, just that seems helpful. And I'm thinking about what you shared about shame, and I'm thinking about the times when either I have or when I've heard stories or read about other people's reflections on where that sharing of the shame may be misplaced. So I'm thinking about women. Sometimes I'm thinking about people of color, those who are disabled. And I'm thinking about the hustle. Like it would be hard enough to heal thyself when it comes to the hustle mindset. And then there's the systemic things that, my gosh, if we tried to get healing from a system that says you're not good enough unless you're hustling constantly and proving your worth constantly, I guess so. So I think there's some less helpful places probably to process some of this with and to share it before it was safe to do so, or if it was ever safe to do so. Am I making any sense? I feel like I just asked 27 questions possibly, but.
So what's resonating with me is I'm thinking about the system, and I'm thinking about how the system exists to create certain things, right? Like you've got your higher ed institution that needs classes to be taught, it needs grades to be submitted, it needs advisors, it needs blah, 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 it needs your publications, it needs all of those things. And so for me, the way that lands is, if you are doing all of the things that the system is requiring of you, then you are putting your time and energy into supporting the system, not yourself. And so there's this, and it doesn't mean those two things can't exist simultaneously. Like maybe you're supporting the system and yourself at the same time, but you've got to find ways that are aligned to your own values, right? Like you don't say yes to a service committee, or if you have a choice to teach a particular class or whatever, you don't say yes if it's not something that really speaks to you, if it's not really a deeper sort of desire of yours. Because if it's not, you're just supporting the system, you're not supporting yourself. And when you're just supporting the system, you don't have as much strength, you don't have as much bandwidth, you don't have as much capacity, you just don't have the energy to do it all when it's not aligned to your own, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? When it's not aligned to sort of your own desires, to your own values, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And as you're sharing it, certainly parts of that system can feed us well, but not the whole beast of it.
Right.
The whole beast will eat us right up.
Right. And I think that part of self-compassion is not just being able to say no to something, but being able to sort of feel all the pain that comes with having to say no. Like, oh my God, I'm going to let people down, and they're going to think I'm incompetent, and whatever, all the feelings that come up, like feel the feelings and then say no. Right. And then draw the line and say, you know what, in the end, this is my why. My why is that I need to take care of myself so that I can show up for my students, my colleagues, my children, my whatever it is, right? I need to be a whole person. And if I'm just doing the sort of system, working to uphold the system, I'm very much fragmented. I'm doing this thing that they want me to do and that thing that they want me to do and that thing. And I need my wholeness so that I can sustain my energy.
That's so beautiful. I don't want to stop this conversation, which is, I don't have to, but we're going to go to the recommendations. But I just thank you for these such powerful things. I have a sense that when I listen to this, when after our editor does his magic with it, I'm going to need to hear this multiple times. It's going to be on repeat. So thank you for all these reflections and helpful tools. And I know you'll be sharing a little bit more in the recommendations segment. This time, I wanted to share a recommendation from a prior guest. Tolu Noah has been on a couple of times now. And so anytime I see her put something out, I'm always like, oh, I got to go see this. It's going to be good. And so she gave a workshop, and the title of it was Behind the Curtain: Tip to Make Virtual Facilitation of Faculty Development Workshops Easier. But I do want to say, even if you're not in faculty development, if you ever facilitate, which is to say, all of us are facilitators in one way, shape, or form, this is a wonderful resource. So it's a workshop that she gave to an organization. There's a video of her giving it. And she does such a tremendous job of providing lots of resources. And I would just suggest, if you do go check it out, just pick one thing. And the one thing that I picked out of the many, many resources that she has there is I didn't realize that Padlet, I like making use of Padlet. It's a virtual corkboard, and I enjoy that as a collaborative tool in different kinds of learning and work collaboration. But I didn't realize that you can link just to a specific section of a Padlet. So she had her workshop broken up into something like 3 or 4 sections, and she'd stop. And then if you could just add to that section of the Padlet, here's the link to do that. Oh, and then this is the second exercise. Now you could just go and add. And I thought, I had no idea you could do that. And so I do suggest that you go, and it's also just so fun to get to see her. Speaking of people who are able to do things that they clearly are so good at and that bring them joy. I mean, she's definitely one of those people. I would suggest just going to look. She has her whole setup there. If any of you ever do any virtual meetings, virtual facilitation, it's so fun to get to see a photograph of how her setup is. And she explains everything. This is where I have this and this is where I have that. So I was very much enjoying it, but I did have to shrink it down for me because I just wanted to follow all of the things that she was saying. But I was like, what is one thing you could do? And the one thing I could do that I already know how to use, but I could just level it up a little bit, is that Padlet trick. But there's so much else that she has in this workshop. I'd strongly recommend it. By the way, you don't even have to watch the video. She's got all of her slides, and then she's got links to the things that she talked about, and then this Padlet board that lots of people shared ideas on as well. So I am now, Danielle, going to pass it over to you for whatever you would like to recommend.
I guess my recommendation is, gosh, there are a couple, but
please, you got time.
Okay. So I'm just imagining the higher ed environment, and, you're teaching at different times. You have meetings at different times. For some of us who are adjuncts, I did that for a long time myself. We're going from one institution to the next institution. And it really feels like a whirlwind. Like, we never have the same schedule every day. We're not even in the same place every day. And so finding moments to ground yourself is absolutely essential, because you can have your energy over there at that institution and over there at that institution. Or, if you're like at one institution, maybe you have your energy over there on that service committee, and then you have some of your energy over there on, your classroom. You've got to have moments where you come back to yourself and you gather all of your energy and you bring it back to you, and you allow yourself to just be present, and you feel yourself ground. A lot of people who talk about grounding, they talk about, like, imagine yourself growing roots from your feet down to the center of the earth, or imagine a cord, or whatever it is, right? Like, finding time to ground like regularly before every class, probably before every meeting, is essential, especially in that environment where you're constantly moving and everything's changing all the time. And I think that as faculty, we love the freedom and the flexibility, and we like to just kind of, we like that we have a different schedule every day, but it can create some problems in terms of like, I remember I was just telling you before the recording, I had a colleague who was an adjunct, and she was teaching 7 classes at different institutions across like 3 institutions. And she said sometimes she would walk into her class and be like, oh my gosh, what class am I teaching right now? Like, I don't even know. And when you get to that point, like burnout is so close, right? Your burnout is so, so close. So find times to ground, find times to feel yourself again, find time. And I'm talking like, and when I say find times, I don't mean like once a week, do it multiple times a day. Like, okay, I'm going to collect all my energy and I'm going to feel myself right here and now. So that is the one recommendation. The other one just comes from my own experience of, I'm thinking about the Buddha, and the Buddha talks about attachment, and attachment is the cause of all suffering. And I'm thinking about my work addiction and how if you are somebody who can't stop working, you can't stop planning your classes. I remember going to a movie and planning my class while I was sitting in the movie theater kind of thing. If you are attached at that level, that is going to cause suffering. And so practicing the grounding, practicing the pausing, practicing detaching yourself is so, so, so important if you want to do this work in a sustainable way. So yeah, I guess that's my recommendation.
What is a small practice about detaching yourself?
So it can come in a few different ways. You could just say, every day before I eat lunch, I'm going to sit down and imagine myself growing roots into the center of the earth. Or I am going to sit down and write a few things I'm grateful for. Or I'm going to sit down and just breathe and feel what it feels like to be me. What is it like to be me? Do I even know right now? Often, after we've taught a few classes and we get back to our office, we don't even know what we're doing anymore. We don't know who we are. We're so spread thin. And so it's just whatever practice feels good to you to sort of gather yourself and bring yourself back to wholeness.
Before we close our time together, I realize that you just sort of talked us through that from a hypothetical practice. Would you just lead us through one? Like people, if they are in a place where they could do this, or press pause, and if you can find a place where you can do this, would you just guide us through one before we close?
Yes, of course. Let's go ahead and just take a second and pause. Notice what it feels like to be in the silence. Notice what's going on with you. What are your energies? Do you have a frenetic energy going on? Is there a sadness, like a sad energy, a down energy? Notice your emotions. Just take some time to welcome everything that's with you. Really just let everything be here. You don't have to shove anything away. You don't have to push anything away. You get to be exactly as you are. And notice what it feels like to be you right now. And go ahead and take a breath. And when you exhale, imagine growing roots from your feet into the ground. So it's going to go through the floor, all the way into the ground. So inhale and then exhale and feel your roots grow a little bit more. Inhale again and feel your roots grow a little bit more. Do that a couple more times here. And hopefully at this point, you can feel a little more grounded. And that grounding can support all the things you have going on, all the things you're trying to hold right now. And then maybe just little by little, let some things go and let them just sort of float away. And then just one last breath here. So I tried to do that a little quicker than I normally would, but hopefully something like that, a practice like that, is helpful. Oh, the other thing I really like doing is writing down one thing that you appreciate about yourself. Like, I really love the way I interacted with this student today, or I really love the way I showed up for so-and-so today, or whatever it is. I really love the way I think about this one thing. That's also a really nice grounding practice. I think that when we're sort of floating out there in the world and not grounded, we forget our worth. So that's another way to do it.
I am so grateful that you reached out or someone reached out on your behalf. And I'm so glad to have been connected. And I'm so glad that I asked at the end if you would be willing to do that. That was unplanned, friends who are listening. I feel like, are you feeling frenetic? Why, yes, I am. It was wonderful for me. I hope it was wonderful for the many people listening around the world too. So I know that Danielle and I would love to hear from anyone. If that was at all transformative, just drop me a note if you're subscribed to the emails or whatever, send us a note. I know we'd love to both know that meant something to you too. Yeah, but it was worth it, Danielle, just for me, if nothing else for anyone else, selfishly speaking. Boy, I didn't know I needed grounding, and now I have a different kind of practice. Yeah, that's so wonderful. I'm so glad.
I'm so glad. Good.
So
it
glad.
Felt fast to me. So I'm glad it felt good to you.
It's funny because it felt fast to me too, because you started talking and I was like, oh, we're back now. I was fully into it. So funny. Oh, well, thank you so much for this conversation. And we'll have all the links to how to get in touch with you if anyone's interested to learn more about you and your work. That'll all be in. And also your podcast. If you appreciated today's conversation, there's an entire podcast, the Self-Compassionate Professor podcast, and that link will be there in the show notes and on Danielle's profile as well. So thank you so much again.
Yes, and I want to also say I have career wellness chats, like coffee chats once a month. So if anybody wants to come to those, you can just go to my website, selfcompassionateprofessor.com, and click on coffee chats and sign up. We're going to actually be offering 2 in May. But yeah, I try to do them once a month, and it's just a place where we can really honor and respect career wellness and what that means. So they're free. Come if you like. It would be great to have you. Yeah. And thank you, Bonnie.
Oh, thanks so much. You're there. I have at least one colleague who is really interested in wellness. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that last thing. Now I have even something more tangible to pass on to someone who is interested in that area. And yeah, so that's such a great resource. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Bonnie, you're so easy to talk to. I really appreciated it.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, you helped settle my frenetic energy. So it was a mutual thing. Thanks once again to Danielle De La Mare for joining me on today's episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. Today's episode was produced by me, Bonnie Stachowiak. It was edited by Andrew Kroger. Podcast production support was provided by Sierra Priest. I so appreciate you for listening and being a part of the Teaching in Higher Ed community. If you would like to extend that, I invite you to sign up for the weekly update. You'll receive the most recent episodes' show notes, as well as some other resources that don't show up in those same show notes. Head over to teachinginhighered.com/subscribe to sign up. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Teaching in Higher Ed.